Hi, welcome back to the shop. Today we're going to finish up on the axe handle stools. We're going to finish out the tops, talk a little bit about the finish, put in the wire rope footrest, and then we'll just kind of do a little follow-up, throw a couple quarters in the cuss jar and call this one done. Let's get started. Now it's been a good 24 hours since I assembled the chair. I'm going to leave it in the clamps, and I'm actually clamping one of the clamps in my vise to hold everything nice and steady. And I want to do this, and I'll keep it this way for a good chunk of the rest of the build, just to keep from torquing those legs and breaking that bond that I have. And now it's time to flush trim these with the seat of the chair. For that, I'm just using a flush trim bit, and I'll just work my way slowly across. And I'll reposition the clamps as necessary. After flush trimming the tennons as they came through, I wetted the surface really well with a lot of water, let it really raise the grain up, and now I'm just going through and using a scraper to bring that end grain down so that everything is flush. Once that's done, I can sand this. I'll work my way up through the grits. 100, 120, 150 is probably as far as I'll go. Now it's time to start working on our footrest, and in this case we're going to be using some wire rope. Now the way we can do this without having a bulky splice in it is we're going to be using something called a molly, and that's where we take a single strand from a wire rope and wrap it around itself until it forms one continuous loop. If you look at the way wire rope is made, you have a central core, and then around it you have 6 strands, and these strands are all kinked so that they follow around each other, and they look something like this when you take it apart. Now when you take apart the wire rope, I'll tell you right now, you're going to need about 30 feet of it, and you're going to want to take one strand off at a time. If you try to do more than that, it's going to end up into a big jumbled mess. Now the way the molly works, you're just going to want to hold it up, and you want to wrap it inside itself, and you want to look at how it's laying up. And in this case, if you do it correctly, it will start as kind of look like they're separated a little bit, and eventually you'll fill in these areas. If you wrap it the wrong way, what's going to happen is that it will just start kind of following and lay in next to itself and look like this. And what you'll end up with, if you try to do this around 5 or 6 complete wraps, you'll end up with kind of this hexagon shaped piece, or octagon, or however many sides you start off. For this particular project, we're going to be using 5/8 wire rope, and this is a piece I've already taken apart. I bought a piece that was about 30 feet long, and at the time, this was a couple of years ago, it costs about $2 a foot. Now you'll have enough to make 6 stools if you do this, so you might want to find somebody else that wants to make the stools, or you just want to make a big bar set. That'll be fine too. The other thing you're going to do is all this wire rope, all these individual strands in here, they've all been greased, and that allows them to rub against each other with minimal friction, helping the wire rope last a little bit longer, or reducing the wear on the wire rope. So you're going to want to clean that off. What I've done is I have a tub that's filled with some kerosene. I can soak it in for a couple of days, let it work in there, and then a lot of that grease will come out, and I can wipe it down with a rag with some mineral spirits or something like that to kind of clean up what residue is left behind. It's not an easy job no matter what you do. It just takes a lot of grunt work to get it off of there, but it can be done. As I mentioned before, without the core, you'll only get really 5 wraps around in the molly. And that's okay for most applications, except in this one I found that wasn't stiff enough. So I have reintroduced the core, and this is the core from that strand of rope. I'll put a loop of core in there, wrap it around, get my 6 wraps plus the core, and that makes it plenty stiff to rest your feet on. And I'll show you how I do that when we get to that point. Before we actually get started putting in the footrest, there's one more thing that's very important I want to warn you about. If you look at the end of this piece of wire rope, you can see these little pieces sticking off. These are called jaggers when the individual wires come off of there. And they will pierce through a glove and go right into your skin, and it will hurt all the way down to your nether regions. So you want to trim this off and then wrap some tape around it to make sure that you don't get any of these ends coming apart. Because believe me, once you get hit, you'll know what I'm talking about. To trim the end off of this, I'm just going to use a little 4-inch grinder with a metallic cutoff wheel. Now I'll just wrap up the end with a little bit of blue tape. This should keep it from coming apart again. To start the process, I'll just start feeding the wire rope through the holes. And now I can look at how do I want this to wrap, and that, as you can see as I pull this around, that's exactly the way it should look when you start wrapping it up. They're intertwining each other, almost, well, it looks like a double helix, and that's the way you know. If I made it the wrong direction, it'll just look like it follows itself and doesn't look right. So that's one good indication. The other thing I have that I'll be using occasionally is this. This is a marlin spike, and it's used specifically for splicing wire rope, and it can come in handy. I don't expect you to have one of those. Screwdrivers will work, and there are times I'll show you where you might need to tuck the core or something like that, but it can be useful for that. So I'm just going to bring this around and just start working around. Unfortunately, you got to go the long way, so it's 30 feet of strand going through each time. It does get shorter eventually, but it just takes a while. Now that I have about 3 wraps around this section of the molly, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the core back into it, and this will give it a little more stability and support so that I can I'll be able to get a full 6 wraps. And basically I'm just going to wrap it in and around, and now that it's in, I can just continue to wrap the cord, and I'll also wrap the core as I go along. Well, it's kind of hard to see, but here's the core, the start of the core, and so here's the end of it. So I'm just going to take a grinder and cut that off, and then I'll tuck it inside. Although this core doesn't have to be perfectly lined up, the closer you get it, actually the better off you are. So. The other thing that I'm going to want to do is pull this out. I'm just going to put some tape around that, just so it doesn't come unfrayed. And once this core is completed, it will be so far down inside the wire rope that you'll never see this tape again. As I came around for the last loop, I just brought it up and measured it to make sure that everything was nice and tight. Now, one of the things, if the ends here don't line up perfectly, let me pop this other end off. So your two ends should come around, and there should be a groove there that those two should meet up perfectly in. If they don't, you've messed up someplace. And don't be afraid to just take the whole thing apart and rewrap it. It can be a little frustrating, but it's worth it in the end, because then you get this nice tight look, and it looks just like a complete piece of wire rope. Now I can still see where this kind of butt joint is, so then all you want to do is just bring this around and hide that inside one of the legs, and that way it's impossible to find. There is just a little bit of give left in this, and eventually, just through time and people putting their feet on here, this will eventually work its way around in a circle, and that joint will become exposed. The easiest way to take care of that is I just put a nail right through, and I go right through the wire rope and everything here, and I'll do that at each leg. If the nail squirts out like it did here, that's not a problem. You just take a punch, and I just tack it, push it back down in there into the wire rope. It disappears and nobody knows, and I'll come back and fill that hole that the nail left. For a finish, I'm just going to be using some polyurethane like I use on the legs. These are going to see a lot of seat time, so that needs to be really durable. I'll probably do about 4 coats. The first couple coats will be a gloss, and everything will be cut 50% with mineral spirits. The last 2 coats will just be a satin. Now for the footrest, I'm just going to leave mine plain, but one of the things I was playing with, and I might actually do this to a footrest, and I don't know if you can see. I took a sample molly that I had, and I went out and I just took a propane torch to it and tried to heat up this area here to try to bring out some of the different colors as you temper the metal. And it's got a lot of browns and a little bit of blue and some of the straw in it as well. And that would certainly be an option for your finishing. You can actually control your heat pretty well, so you could actually do this without burning the legs with a little bit of practice. I also tried wrapping it in copper just for grins and giggles, and that didn't turn out well at all, but I just wanted to try some different things and give you some options for finishing that footrest. Well, that's all I have time for on this project. I usually do the finishes on this in the evenings during the week when I really don't have time or the ability to tape, at least not with the kids screaming in the background. As far as the cuss jar is concerned, there's a couple things that can be kind of frustrating on this project. One is the footrest, which, I'll admit I had to take one apart a couple of times because it wasn't laying quite right. But I got that straightened out, so for me that would be a couple of quarters. And then the other thing is just fitting these tennons. If you're not real patient with them, getting a nice tight fit can be a little bit frustrating as well. So I'll just throw one in there. Overall, I think this is a really simple and fun project to do, though. So, and I have made quite a few of them. One last thing before I go. Brian Gorella, who has the GarageWorks podcast, is doing a fundraiser to buy a new camera. And I can tell you that shops are not kind to cameras, and it can be difficult. And it sounds like his is getting pretty old and worn out. So if you can help him out and raise some money so he can buy a new camera, his podcasts are well worth the donation. Well, if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, please feel free to email me at andrew@thelevelplumbandsquare.com. And until next time, enjoy your day.